I never thought a text message about a dishwasher would be the thing to finally break me. But there I was, 72 years old, sitting in my cramped rental apartment, listening to the faucet drip, staring at the photo Jessica had sent me. A gleaming new Smeg dishwasher, all curves and chrome with her message underneath. "What do you think, Mom? Getting it for Thanksgiving. Why don't you come early around 10 a.m.? We've got a pile of old dishes waiting for you to handle." 1-6. The winking emoji felt like a slap across my weathered cheek. 23 years of being the unpaid help at my own son's house. And she was flaunting her wealth while reminding me of my place in their hierarchy. I set the phone down with trembling fingers and stared out the window at the parking lot where my 15-year-old Honda Civic sat rusting in the November rain. How had I become this person? How had Eleanor Vance, who once managed a household budget and raised 3 children while working part-time at the library, become nothing more than a kitchen servant to her daughter-in-law? The answer was simple, though it had taken me decades to see it clearly. It happened one compromise at a time, one small surrender after another, until I had given away so much of myself that I barely remembered who I used to be. My transformation into a doormat began the day Brandon married Jessica 15 years ago. She was beautiful, ambitious, and had a way of making her requests sound like favors she was doing for you. Would I mind watching their apartment while they went on their honeymoon? Of course not. Could I help with the wedding cleanup since the caterers had left such a mess? Naturally. Would I be willing to host Christmas dinner since their place was too small? I was honored, they asked. Each yes felt generous at the time. But looking back, I can see how Jessica was testing my boundaries, pushing to see how far she could bend me before I broke. And Brandon, my sweet Brandon, who used to bring me dandelions from the yard and tell me I was the best mom in the world, had somehow transformed into a man who watched his wife treat his mother like hired help and said nothing. The shift was so gradual I almost didn't notice it happening. First, Jessica started asking me to arrive early for family gatherings to help with preparations. Then she began leaving lists of tasks for me to complete. Soon I was doing their laundry, cleaning their bathrooms, and cooking elaborate meals while she sat on the couch scrolling through her phone or getting her nails done. When I tried to address it once, years ago, Brandon had looked at me with such disappointment. His mother was being difficult, he said. Jessica worked so hard at her marketing job, and couldn't I just help out a little more? Family was supposed to support each other, wasn't it? I had swallowed my hurt and nodded, convincing myself that this was what love looked like. This was what good mothers did. But the dishwasher message was different somehow. It crystallized everything that had been building inside me for years. The casual cruelty of it, the assumption that I would just show up and clean up after their excess, the complete lack of acknowledgement that I was a human being with my own dignity and worth. I felt something shift inside my chest, like a door that had been rusted shut for years finally creaking open. My hands shook as I dialed Brandon's number. I needed to hear his voice, needed to give him one more chance to see what was happening, to stand up for his mother the way I had always stood up for him. He answered on the 4th ring, and I could hear Jessica in the background complaining about being late for some wine tasting event. When I told him about the message, about how it made me feel, his response was everything I feared and nothing I hoped for. "Mom, you know how Jessica is. Just go along with it for the sake of keeping peace in the house. It's not that big a deal if you come a little early, is it?" The words hit me like ice water. Not that big a deal. 23 years of being taken for granted, of being treated like a servant in my own family. And it wasn't that big a deal. I hung up without saying goodbye and sat in the silence of my apartment, feeling more alone than I had since my husband died 8 years ago. That night, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible to me just hours before. I wasn't going to Thanksgiving dinner. I wasn't going to show up at 10 in the morning to wash their dishes and serve their food and clean up their mess while they treated me like I was invisible. For the first time in decades, I was going to put myself first. The next morning brought an unexpected delivery that would change everything. A thick envelope with the letterhead of Harrison Morrison Associates, delivered by a courier who waited patiently while I signed for it with confusion. Inside was a letter that began with condolences and ended with the most shocking news of my life. My dear childhood friend Genevieve Sterling had passed away 3 weeks ago, and somehow, impossibly, she had left me everything. The beach estate in Newport that I remembered visiting once when we were teenagers. The investment accounts that her late husband had built over decades in tech stocks. The trust fund that would generate more money in a month than I had seen in years. But there was a catch, as there always is with gifts that seem too good to be true. To officially inherit, I had to successfully organize a major charity gala at the estate within 3 months. The Sterling Foundation Gala, Genevieve had called it in her will. It was her final test, her way of ensuring that whoever inherited her legacy would use it for good. I had 90 days to pull together an event that would raise money for local literacy programs, and if I failed, everything would go to charity instead. The lawyer, Mr. Trimons. Harrison was a kind man in his 60s who spoke about Genevieve with genuine affection. She had never married, never had children, and had apparently followed my life from afar through mutual friends. She knew about my struggles since Richard died, about how I had been forced to sell our house and move into the apartment. She knew about Brandon and Jessica, though Mr. Harrison was too tactful to say so directly. In her personal letter to me, written in the spidery handwriting I remembered from our teenage years, Genevieve had included a line that brought tears to my eyes. "Don't ever live small to make other people comfortable, Eleanor. Live the brilliant life you deserve." Reading those words in my dingy apartment, surrounded by the evidence of how small my life had become, something fundamental shifted inside me. This wasn't just about inheriting money or property. This was about reclaiming the person I used to be, the person I was meant to be. The drive to Newport took 4 hours, but it felt like traveling to another world. The Sterling estate sat on 12 acres of pristine coastline, with manicured gardens and a main house that looked like something from a movie. The staff, led by a formidable housekeeper named Mrs. Chen, welcomed me with a respect I hadn't experienced in years. They had loved Genevieve, and by extension, they were prepared to love me too. That first night in the master bedroom, looking out at the ocean through floor-to-ceiling windows, I felt like I was waking up from a very long sleep. The woman who had scrubbed Jessica's toilets and accepted her contempt was still there inside me, but she was no longer in charge. Eleanor Vance, the real Eleanor Vance, was stirring to life. The next morning, I hired Chloe Martinez to help plan the gala. She was 35, brilliant, and had a track record of organizing high-profile events for Boston's elite. More importantly, she saw potential in me that I had forgotten existed. Within hours of our first meeting, she had me trying on clothes from designers I couldn't pronounce and posing for professional photographs that would serve as our marketing materials. The woman who stared back at me from those photos was someone I barely recognized. Silver hair styled into an elegant bob instead of the sad ponytail I had worn for years. Makeup that highlighted cheekbones I didn't know I still had. A navy blue dress that made me look like the kind of woman who belonged in a Newport mansion, which I suppose I now was. Chloe posted the first photo on the Sterling Foundation's social media accounts with a simple caption, "New leadership, new vision." The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments from people who remembered Genevieve, congratulations from local business leaders, and most surprisingly, messages from old friends who had lost touch with me over the years. Meanwhile, my phone was ringing constantly with calls from Brandon and Jessica. The first few calls were bewildered, then angry, then desperate. Jessica had done her research and discovered exactly how much money was involved. The sweet, loving daughter-in-law who had treated me like garbage for 15 years suddenly wanted to have long heart-to-heart conversations about family and forgiveness. I let them all go to voicemail. For the first time in decades, I had more important things to do than manage their emotions and cater to their needs. I had a gala to plan, a foundation to run, and a life to rebuild. The planning consumed me in the best possible way. Guest lists and menu tastings and flower arrangements and entertainment bookings. I discovered I had a talent for organization and delegation that had been dormant for years. More than that, I discovered I enjoyed being in charge, making decisions, and watching people respond to my authority with respect instead of dismissal. 3 weeks into the planning, Brandon showed up at the estate unannounced. I was in the library going over seating charts when Mrs. Prupley Chen informed me that my son was at the front door, demanding to see me. The old Eleanor would have dropped everything and rushed to accommodate him. The new Eleanor finished reviewing the charts before walking calmly to the foyer. He looked smaller somehow, standing in the marble entryway in his rumpled khakis and polo shirt, clutching a folder of papers like a shield. His hair was thinning more than I remembered, and there were new lines around his eyes that spoke of stress and sleepless nights. For a moment, my heart softened with the instinct to comfort him, but then I remembered all the times he had chosen Jessica's convenience over my dignity. Brandon launched into a prepared speech about being worried about me, about how I was clearly being taken advantage of by unscrupulous people who wanted to steal my inheritance. He had brought papers, he said, that would help protect me from making any rash decisions. Legal documents that would put my assets into a trust managed by him and Jessica. For my own protection, of course. The audacity of it took my breath away. After years of treating me like an unpaid servant, after allowing his wife to humiliate me at every family gathering, after refusing to see or acknowledge my pain, he had the nerve to stand in my house and try to take control of my life because suddenly I had something he wanted. I looked at my son, this man I had raised and loved and sacrificed for, and felt the last chains of obligation fall away. I didn't raise my voice or lose my temper. I simply looked him in the eye and spoke the truth. Brandon, I said, I don't need your protection. I need your respect. You haven't given me that in 15 years. Instead, you've stood by while your wife treated me like hired help in my own family. Now you're in my home, trying to manipulate me into giving you control over my life because you think I'm too stupid or too weak to manage my own affairs. I'm neither stupid nor weak, and I'm done pretending otherwise for your comfort. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, anger, hurt, and finally a kind of desperate calculation. He tried to argue, to explain, to make me understand that everything he had done was out of love and concern. But I was past the point of accepting his explanations. I asked Mrs. Chen to escort him to his car, and I watched from the library window as he drove away. Probably for the first time in his adult life, unsure of his ability to manipulate his mother into giving him what he wanted. That evening he called repeatedly, alternating between apologies and threats. Jessica left voicemails that ranged from tearful pleas for forgiveness to angry accusations that I had lost my mind. I deleted them all without listening to more than a few seconds. Their panic was confirmation that I was finally doing something right. The weeks leading up to the gala were a whirlwind of activity and transformation. I threw myself into the work with an energy I hadn't felt in years, rising early to review vendor contracts and staying up late to practice my speech. Chloe became not just my event planner but my friend and mentor, helping me navigate the social complexities of Newport society and teaching me to trust my own instincts about people and situations. More importantly, she helped me understand that my years of people-pleasing and self-sacrifice hadn't made me noble or generous. They had made me invisible and ineffective. Real generosity, she explained, came from a position of strength, not weakness. You couldn't help other people if you didn't first help yourself. The gala was scheduled for a Saturday evening in early December. By Thursday, we had confirmations from 300 guests, including several celebrities, prominent business leaders, and politicians. The local press was covering it as one of the social events of the season. Corporate sponsors had contributed enough money to ensure the literacy programs would be funded for years to come. On Friday morning, Brandon called one final time. His voice was different now, smaller and more honest than it had been in years. He told me everything. The credit card debt that had spiraled out of control thanks to Jessica's shopping addiction. The second mortgage on their house. The business investments that had gone bad. They were facing bankruptcy within months, and my inheritance represented their only hope of avoiding financial ruin. More importantly, he told me about Jessica's plan to disrupt the gala. She intended to show up and make a scene, to humiliate me publicly, and paint me as an unfit person who had stolen money from her rightful heirs. It was a desperate plan born of desperation, but it could potentially destroy everything I had worked for. Instead of feeling angry or betrayed, I felt something unexpected: gratitude. For the first time in 15 years, Brandon was telling me the truth. He was treating me like an adult who deserved to know what was happening and make her own decisions about how to respond. It was the first genuine respect he had shown me since his wedding day. I thanked him for the warning and told him I would handle it. Then I called Chloe and shared the information. Together, we came up with a plan that would turn Jessica's intended ambush into the final act of my transformation. The evening of the gala arrived crisp and clear, with stars visible over the ocean and the estate glowing with thousands of tiny lights. I had chosen a midnight blue gown that made me feel like royalty, and my hair was styled in an elegant updo that showed off the pearl earrings Richard had given me for our 25th anniversary. Looking in the mirror before heading downstairs, I saw a woman I barely recognized. Confident, powerful, and completely in control of her own life. The guests began arriving at 7, and for 2 hours I moved among them like the hostess I was born to be. Conversations about art and literature and social causes, introductions to people who treated me as an equal, compliments on the event and the cause we were supporting. I felt like I was finally living in my own skin again after years of feeling like a ghost in my own life. At 9:15, just as I was about to begin my speech, Jessica made her entrance. She had dressed for maximum impact in a scarlet red gown that was inappropriate for the occasion and too young for her age. Her voice carried across the room as she pushed through the crowd, demanding attention and hurling accusations. She called me a fraud, a liar, a crazy old woman who was being manipulated by gold diggers and con artists. She claimed I had stolen money that rightfully belonged to her family, and that everyone in the room was being fooled by an elaborate scam. The room fell silent, 300 people frozen in shock and embarrassment. For a moment that felt like an eternity, I stood at the podium looking out at the sea of faces, some curious, some horrified, all waiting to see how I would respond. The old Eleanor would have crumbled under the humiliation, would have fled or tried to explain or apologized for existing. But I wasn't the old Eleanor anymore. I smiled and picked up the microphone with steady hands. "Ladies and gentlemen," I said, "please excuse the interruption. My daughter-in-law appears to be having some sort of episode, possibly related to the stress of knowing that the bank will be foreclosing on her home tomorrow morning due to her gambling debts and credit card fraud." The silence that followed was different now, anticipatory rather than shocked. I paused to let my words sink in, then continued. "I'd also like to introduce a special guest tonight, a financial journalist from Forbes magazine, who is writing an article about responsible wealth management and charitable giving in coastal communities." The spotlight found Jessica just as the cameras started flashing. Her face went white as she realized that her public humiliation of me had become her own public exposure. Security officers appeared at her elbows, politely but firmly escorting her toward the exit, while she sputtered protests that no one believed. I waited until she was gone, then delivered my speech about second chances and the power of literacy to transform lives. The applause that followed was thunderous, not just for the cause but for the way I had handled the crisis. Several people commented afterward that they had never seen anyone manage a difficult situation with such grace and authority. The gala raised over $2 million for literacy programs throughout Rhode Island. More importantly, it established me as a serious philanthropist and community leader. The press coverage was overwhelmingly positive, focusing on my commitment to education and my elegant handling of what the newspapers diplomatically called a family disruption. In the months that followed, Brandon and Jessica divorced. She moved back to her mother's house in Ohio, and he began the difficult work of rebuilding his life and his character. We started having coffee together once a week, tentatively at first, then with growing warmth as he learned to see me as a person rather than just his mother. It wasn't the relationship we had once had, but but it was honest in a way that felt more valuable than the false intimacy we had shared before. The trust fund generated enough income for me to live comfortably while funding educational initiatives throughout New England. I kept the Newport house but also bought a smaller place in Boston where I could stay when working with urban literacy programs. I traveled to conferences and board meetings, served on committees and planning boards, and discovered that I had opinions about everything from curriculum development to fundraising strategies. 6 months after the gala, I was featured on the cover of a regional lifestyle magazine as one of the area's most influential philanthropists. The article called me a late-blooming social entrepreneur who had transformed personal tragedy into community benefit. Reading it, I realized they had gotten the story exactly backward. I hadn't transformed tragedy into benefit. I had transformed a lifetime of diminishing myself into the discovery of who I had always been meant to be. On a warm evening in June, I stood on the terrace of the Newport house, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of gold and rose. Chloe was beside me, planning our next fundraising event. But I was thinking about Genevieve and the gift she had given me. Not the money or the property, though those had been transformative. The real gift had been the reminder that I deserved to live a brilliant life. That settling for less than I was worth had never been noble or generous or kind. I thought about the woman I had been a year ago, sitting in that cramped apartment accepting humiliation as the price of staying connected to family. That woman felt like a stranger to me now. Someone I remembered with compassion but no longer recognized as myself. The woman I had become was someone I was proud to be. Strong, generous, purposeful, and completely unwilling to apologize for taking up space in the world. The phone in my purse buzzed with a text message. For a split second, I felt the old anxiety. The instinctive assumption that someone needed something from me that I would have to provide regardless of the cost to myself. But when I looked at the screen, it was just Brandon asking if I wanted to have dinner next week to celebrate the anniversary of his new job. I typed back that I would love to, then put the phone away and returned my attention to the sunset. Tomorrow, there would be meetings and phone calls and decisions to make about programs and people and possibilities. Tonight, there was just the ocean and the sky and the quiet satisfaction of a life being lived on my own terms. I had spent 72 years learning how to be Eleanor Vance. It had taken me this long to realize that she was worth becoming.